Surf's up. Welcome to the second episode of the Mauisnake show. Today we've got two very special guests, one of which comes from the other game. And yes, I'm talking about Valorant. Most recently playing for Cloud9 White, the six-time Game Changers North American champion, one-time Ignition Series champion, Mel comes on to talk about what it means to be a top player and in-game leader in the Valorant scene, and arguably the best woman player in the game's history. But first, you'll know Hawka from his YouTube channel and his recent work as an analyst at the Rio Major. He can also frequently be heard casting in various tournaments, as he's always a pleasure to listen to. We hand out our awards for Best Teammate, Best Body Language, and even Best Jerseys, and more, before we dive deep into what was our favorite film of the year, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. What's up, Hawka? What's up? It's the esports scholar on the Mauisnake show. We've got Hawka here. We're going to talk about some interesting awards. I came up with a few different categories, and then we're actually going to get into what I think is both of ours most interesting movie of the year. Yeah, Hawka, how you doing right now?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I moved to London like a month ago, so I've just been enjoying that. I kind of wish I could get like a better backdrop, because you can see kind of lights, but you can't actually see the buildings, which is a bit of a shame. But all in all, yeah, really good.
The thing is that I noticed in London is that I think a lot of people can recognize things a little too well. So if you start gaining enough critical mass as like an influencer or someone that's doing videos, then someone might actually be able to pinpoint, geo-guess exactly where you are, which is a little bit worrying. Like, I live on the ground floor in London too, and I'm kind of like, I don't want to open my window when I'm recording something, because then people will see exactly where I am. Yeah, but I know you have actually a view of the shard, which is pretty sick. Could you get that actually?
Oh, that might be a struggle. Like, I wish it. So the shard, it's like that way, I think. So it's like, maybe like I would try and move my webcam, but I don't think it will go far enough from the PC.
Okay, that's fine. Don't worry about it. There's going to be people listening on podcasts anyways that aren't even going to get to enjoy this. So
yeah, that's true.
You got to think about them too. Okay, let's get into it. These are categories for the year. They're different people that we want to give some plaudits to, because obviously if you just kind of go by who performed the best, you get a lot of oppers, you get a lot of people that just satisfied the star roles. But I wanted to give a few shout outs to a couple of people that I think were heroes in their own rights. And so the first category I want to start with is the most improved player. And so, Hawka, who do you have for this category?
Okay, I was unsure about what I'm allowed to go with for this, because if a player is basically playing their first season of Tier 1, I don't know if that counts.
You could,
because if that was the case, I'd maybe just say Mauisnake, because his debut year has been ridiculous. But I also felt like that was kind of a cop-out. So I was thinking, because 2021 was a weird year where we didn't have a lot of LANs, I think it's kind of some of those players that came back and did well on LAN. And I didn't expect Rain to be one of those players. And almost just for like the major, I feel like he has to have a shout here, because he's also been very solid throughout the season. But like, that major was just something I did not expect at all.
I went for Rain also. Rain was my pick too. Yeah, I because Rain it was since 2017 that he had a year with, like, you would consider him a star. And this is something that I said that was contentious on the first season of Pro League in 2022. I said on the desk, Rain isn't a star. This guy hasn't been a star for maybe 5 years, and despite the fact that he played his role very well, you would not have considered him someone that you would rely on to deliver you anything in terms of output consistently. So I put Rain as my most improved. If you look at some of the numbers, it's really been since 2017, I think, that he's had anything above a 1.00 1.0 rating, so like the old HLTV rating. And this year he's back. He's like playing pretty well again, especially what he did at the major. Even with the Rio Major, if you combine his stats from like every single year, this is the best year he's ever performed in majors. So that's something that also I have to give Rain credit for, because he just wasn't like 2021 Rain was actually a hindrance. They had to win sometimes despite him. Like, he was making mistakes. Sometimes he looked very simple in the default, but now it felt like he's very much so renewed. And I think that's a lot due to him, but a lot due to the fact that he has this team around him now that he can believe in.
Yeah, I remember that being the big thing for me in 2021 was there was so many defaults where I feel like Rain would be almost like too aggressive and he'd try and do something himself where he just didn't need to. And that could partly be because that phase team was way worse. I looked at the placements of that phase team in that year. At like the big events, they did nothing. They did like absolutely nothing in 2021, which is also probably going to be part of the reason why he improves in this year. But yeah, just the difference is surprising because when I was thinking of this, you always think of players coming onto the scene and then having that just upward trajectory. So that's why I was like, wow, Rain's a little cheeky pick because I was thinking I was being cheeky and I was going to go with something that you didn't. But clearly, we just got the same brain. Oh no.
Yeah, I guess so. I looked at some of the stats because I kind of like I went with what I first believed, and then I kind of looked at the stats to refer to them to see do these things match up. And one guy that I was considering just based off of stats, not actually what I believed, was Stown. Like Stown actually was a pretty average player in 2021, but in 2022, this year, he definitely solidified himself as the star of Heroic, and consistency was the name of the game for Stown. I think he had a single event this entire year where he didn't have above a 1.00 KD, whereas last year, you kind of would see some really nice performances, but then you would see, I think Cologne last year, for example, he didn't do very well. But basically, every single big event this whole year, Stown was delivering for Heroic. So I would give him a shout out too. Another guy is Brokey. I think Brokey was a player that, to me, felt like, especially in the first half of the year for FaZe, he was delivering so much impact for them. So I think that what was funny about Brokey's inclusion in the HLTV top 20 last year was a lot of people were saying that could have been 5 different players, but now this year, I think it's very clear that Brokey is a top 15 player pretty easily. I would say like top 12. I think safe. I would put him safely in my top 12 for the year. I don't know. Do you have any other honorable mentions? You want to move on to the next category?
Yeah, another one for me is Device. Have you seen his rating this year, Maui? Oh my god. This guy's got a 1.30 rating, I'll have you know, for the year. What a beast.
Yeah.
No, okay.
Yeah. He's farming. Yeah.
He's farming, literally farming. Okay, another one. I would say, I think this might even be more for next year, but I've talked about Frozen's role changes a bit on Mouse and how I feel like he's got that freedom now to basically do whatever he wants. I think with BMAS being moved out, he took some of BMAS's spots, and he did start to show improvement towards the second half of the year. So I will be keeping an eye on him too. I think he's another one where, especially coming into the year, you probably wouldn't have expected Mouse to do all that much, and they've had a really good year. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that.
I would actually give Frozen a nod in terms of how much he's contributing to the team. He in 2021, I thought he was very good. I would have probably actually put him as my 20th or 19th best player of the year in 2021 over people like Brokey. But this year, I think it's just coupled with the fact that they're winning. You can see that he's having so much vital impact in terms of just making sure that, he's responsible for whole parts of the map. He's making sure that he's kind of actually developed himself as a closer too. Like I'm liking more of what I'm seeing from him in late rounds, but I'm sure that space is allotted to him because there's no Rops who's always going to be the late round guy. But now I think he's more versatile now. That's how I would describe Frozen. Even though he gets a handful of star spots, he gets a few that are actually not that favorable. Like he's the B lurker on Overpass, and that's not always where you put your star player, and yet he's still finding ways to have impact. Okay, next category we've got here, best teammate. This one is very tough to judge by any metrics. I think if you wanted to have a statistical breakdown of this, you might look at something like support player rating or team flashing or something like that. But I just kind of went with what I think this person is doing in terms of the structure of the team, and it's how I actually think that they're fitting in, despite the fact that they might not get the most resources from their teammates. They might actually have to take a few bad spots, but then they're thriving in those spots. And so I'll go with mine first on this one. I am going with Shush. Shush was my...
Oh my... I knew you were going to say it, because that's mine too.
Jesus, oh God.
Oh
okay,
my
I have
God.
3 others. I have 3 others that are honorable mentions
good.
too. But Shush to me was the guy that, with the least resources of any player on almost any team, and he could be whatever Cadian and Heroic needed him to be in the round, Shush was my best teammate overall. I would say that maybe something that Shush doesn't always do is he's not maybe the best at always throwing the best flashes. I looked at I actually looked back at some demos for Heroic and when thinking about this, and it was Definitely Cadian is throwing by far the most flashes for that team. Like, he's throwing the ones to like try to help people out a lot of the time. But Shush is he's there. He's like, I mean, he's always making sure that he's able to throw like decent utility to set up a couple people like Tessis or like Stown. And so I think that Shush for me is the best teammate. If I were building a team, you wouldn't pick Shush as like your first pick or your second pick, but he's a very easy, clean third pick for that roster.
Yeah, he's like a great player to just have to round out a team. I think the other thing I always like about him specifically for Heroic is that Heroic do play this wild style sometimes where they will just completely on CT side leave their anchors on an island almost. Like on Overpass sometimes, I think it is. Sometimes they'll just have one guy on B, or they'll just play these really weird rounds that not many other teams play, certainly not as often. And so you kind of need to have like a stable pair of hands like Shush. Otherwise, those rounds are going to fall apart. And he's really good at that. And like you were saying, just doesn't get much resources. But I know he's never going to be a problem on the team. And it's also one of the cool things about Counter-Strike, just as a quick tangent, because Shush is, I think, quite a quiet guy in real life also. And I always like it when you can almost see a player's personality translate onto the server in that way. Sometimes you get the quieter guys who are just, hey, I'm happy to fill for the team. Then you can get the loud, brash guys doing their thing. It's really cool when you actually get a reflection of the person in the game when that happens. So yeah, I just always have loved Shush as a player. I think there's not really many bad things I can say about him. He just does his job really well, and yeah, it doesn't get the flash, but does the job.
That's how I would actually describe a few of my other honorable mentions. The first of which, and I think kind of like the best of these players, is Naf. Because Naf in the middle of the year, or when they made that roster change to get Yukindar, Naf ended up changing a few of his positions, and he took basically all the bad spots. Like, him and Nitro are 1-1 for taking, I would say, the worst spots on Liquid. And yet, despite that, Naf was able to find ways to have a lot of impact. I think he's very similar to Shush in that they both don't necessarily get the most resources from their teams, but they're able to actually find ways to actually consistently deliver, and they're never a hindrance. Like a few of the people that I had lower on my list for best teammate were good. Like, they're good in their roles, and they're finding ways to at least win some games, but they're not necessarily delivering in their own right. And I think that Shush and Naf to me are kind of 1A, 1B almost. I still give the edge to Shush, so probably actually 1 and 2. So Naf to me is a guy that also, like, the reason I don't know if Naf is necessarily as good of a teammate sometimes as Shush is because, like, Naf sometimes is just a little slower, and I like why I put someone like Naf beneath Shush is that Shush can sometimes like just change the pace for himself in the middle of a round because he knows something needs to get done. And sometimes for me, Naf, Rops, even a little bit Perfecto, like, they'll just take a little too long for me. And I think Shush is never a guy where I'm like, gee, Shush, like, you were so late on that flank, right? Or you're so late pinching on the bomb site because he was trying to clear every single angle. Sometimes, in those moments, you just need to rush at those opponents so that you actually pull off the best pinch you possibly can. So, other guys I had are Kickert, because he swapped all of his roles. And then actually,
Okay.
the last one you might like this is Mezzi. I thought Mezzi also was not a bad teammate this year. But what do you think about any of those?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of Mezzi too, just because I almost feel like anyone who switches to an in-game leader role like that kind of deserves quite a lot of props, because he definitely didn't have to do that. So whenever you're a player who doesn't have to switch to an IGL but realizes, actually, I might provide more value here because IGLs are sometimes quite rare for European teams, I think that deserves a lot of props for sure. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and the reason I wouldn't put like Kickert and Mezzi is kind of the reason they're not in my 1 or 2 here is because Kickert just fell off a cliff in terms of individual performance. He kind of did the same thing in the middle of the year that Naf did, where he swapped a lot of his roles to just be the support player, but he didn't really get it. And I appreciate Kickert for being that guy to say, you know what, screw it. I'll throw all of my good spots away so that we can fit these new youngsters on the team who are less experienced. But you do want to be able to depend on someone you would consider a good teammate, and I can depend on Shush. I can depend on Naf and Mezzi. I guess like the reason he's here is that, like, yeah, the IGL thing is very selfless, but I don't know if he's like I don't know how high I rate him yet as that caller or
Yeah.
as overall. Maybe by next year he could be a top 10 IGL, honestly, in the space. He might already be like in that 10th spot, but I think he's still got a ways to go.
Sure, yeah. Also, one more, Maui, one more for you. How about Zipex on Astralis for taking all the pressure off his new teammates and just taking all of the blame on himself?
Yeah,
How about that?
he's the ultimate scapegoat, right? Because
Exactly.
everybody knows he has this long contract for them. Everybody knows that like he's just gonna be grandfathered into whatever the new iteration of the team is. But in actuality, he's the one that's taking the most flack. He's like he's got a huge target on his back from the community right now because everybody's like, get this guy out of the team. But it's like, you know what? Who we didn't talk about is Mister that much. Like everybody's like, yeah. Give him a chance. Give Mister a chance. And like honestly, when Buzz comes in with like a 1.01 rating, people are still just gonna hound Zipnix. Like
Exactly.
yeah. So that's true. That's true. A fun category. It's the team that we found the most fun to watch. So who was the most fun for you to watch throughout the year?
I think I also am going to say Heroic on this one just because of the way they play. I think they had a lot of really fun games, and they always seem to me like a team who rarely get blown out. They always seem to be able to just hang in there at least a little bit. Oftentimes, you get these 3-map series. Even against the top teams, they can play them really close. Like, they're a team who, at any point in the tournament, if you've got one of the favorites playing against them, you are actually quite scared. And I think it's kind of because they make the game weird with the way they play sometimes. I was saying earlier, you get all these strange mid-round aggressions, maybe even start of the round, just massively stacking a bomb site. That they just are quite dynamic in the way that they play. It is sometimes a little frustrating that they never quite get over the line, and you're still waiting for that one tournament you thought it was going to be the major where they finally make it happen. But just for actual fun games of Counter-Strike, they've had so many fun games this year. I mean, at the major itself, I think against Furia, sure, the final wasn't great, but against Furia, I had a lot of fun watching that series just because there were so many different scenarios that went down. And towards the end, they actually seemed to just start to play super clinical. And that was a lot of fun to watch, actually, just watching Furia sit there like, oh man, this is tough to watch. But yeah, they just are a really fun team and quite a unique team. And I feel like that's what you want to pick for a spot like this.
I would say that the proactive nature that Heroic is just it never feels like they're backpedaling it around. That's something that I always love to see because Counter-Strike is like, I think some people take the counter in Counter-Strike a little too literally, where they're like, oh, no, we have to assess what the opponents are doing, and then we'll make our next step. But Heroic's like, screw that. We're going to be the ones that strike. And it actually, I mean, to their credit, they were able to take down the fall finals. And so to see them lift that trophy showed that even in a tournament full of, I would say, pretty elite teams, that there was no question that they can get it over the hump. Like, they were able to finally achieve that. And I think actually going into next year, Heroic is the team to me that reads like they have the best chance to create, I wouldn't say an era, but at least like a nice slew of wins, a string of wins. Like that to me seems very possible because I think what is motivating for Cadian is the fact that he has now tasted success at the Pinnacle Cup, at the fall finals, but he never really, like, everybody kind of knows that those are not the crowning achievement of Counter-Strike. Like, you want to win the major, and I think that, like, we saw how Kerrigan could ramp up for the major. He knows the, like, legacy is so important to some of these guys, especially guys who have kind of, like, been on desks before or, like, have expressed their thoughts about the macro picture of the game. And Cadian's a guy that knows that if he were to hang it up right now, people would say he was a good IGL, but they wouldn't consider him a great IGL. But if he's able to get that major victory, I think that elevates his status to be a great in-game leader. And I think that it's going to be really fun to watch their journey moving forward because you just look at the roles, and I think a lot of them are so solid now. Like, we were already praising Shush. I think Stown is such a great, versatile, just star player for them. I think, like, everybody likes the roles except for Cadian himself as the Opper. I think that's the one thing where people draw it into question. But we actually saw at the end of the year, Cadian was able to ramp up his own individual ability. But we don't know if that's at some kind of cost, maybe. Or maybe people have opinions if it's like there's some cost there in terms of his calling. But I think they can... I actually think I'm, like, selling myself on the point that Heroic is my favorite right now to win the next major. Like, and I'm not just looking at the HLTV ranking stat. I think that actually I don't know any other team that can, like, get it going. Like, I feel like FaZe is a team that I'd want to put there. FaZe to me kind of reads like a couple old guys that gotta pop some Viagra to get it on right now, like in Kerrigan and Rain. Like it's tough because they've already been to the mountaintop. They've already been to the summit. But I'll get into my most fun team to watch now. It was Cloud9. It was Cloud9.
Oh my god, Nafoni, how has he won it? How has he won it?
Yes, yeah, Nafoni made me interested in this team because it was so obvious. Like you could read his emotions like on his sleeve. Like you could read if he has a good feel for the game, you could see how great the calling could be sometimes. And it usually was like in the beginning of a half. And what I actually think Groove assessed rather well with this team is that you should start T side, because I think when you start T side for this team, Nafany doesn't have that much pressure on himself. And I think that when you start on the offense and he's just going through his motions, going through the calls, like he's just going to call very well because he's to me, I've seen now multiple times that Nafony can crumble under the pressure. I don't love what I see from him round 29. What is the call? But I do love what I see from their defense on round 29, round 30. Like their CT sides can be impenetrable there. So I really think that Cloud9 had such a they were all over the place for me. They showed me both ends of the spectrum of how great they could be and how bad they could be, and I think that's why they were fun for me to watch, because I never knew what I was gonna get with them. And to me, I needed something in my life this year that was kind of like almost like a toxic relationship, and that was Cloud9 for me. Like I loved them and then I hated them, and so I could praise them when they did well, but I also like just was ready to slander them if they just choked some stupid lead.
Damn, okay. I just went for like the full positive. I just want a positive relationship in my life, Maui. I just love heroic,
Oh.
but for some reason,
Oh, you're saying
I
you're
just
more
love
well
the
adjusted than
toxic
me.
relationships. Maybe, who knows?
Yeah,
Oh man.
Heroic kind of gave you a really great note, but it didn't have the ups and downs that I sometimes need. They never went down tempo for me. Like, you know, if it's a good mix or like a good set from a DJ, sometimes you need a little bit of room to breathe. And Cloud9 gave me that because they gave me the highs and the lows.
Wow, wow. So beautifully put.
I will actually put this out, that I think one team that I think is going to be fun to watch in the next year, and you could come up with your own. I'll give you some time right now. Is Spirit? I think this team is going to be really interesting into the upcoming year because Wonderful was just getting warmed up on this roster, and yet he has such a unique style of opping that when paired with Patsy, who's flying in, being into this aggressive entry, one of the best entries in the game right now, you have this passive opera that knows how to cover the lines for Patsy as he's making his rounds, but you also have a couple other guys who are very suited for their roles too. Like Magix was a player that also was like, I wasn't going to put him in my top 3 for most improved, but he did get better. It feels like he's kind of become one of the more veteran, stable guys on this roster. And then Siren is a guy that just seems like he's pretty good in these anchor spots, you know, kind of bad roles, honestly. And they're a team that they got considerably better. They lost Dexter, they brought in Wonderful, and Chopper had to basically build from the ground up. It felt like what they did at Pro League in the second half of the year looked so bad. Like I hated watching them play. But then when I saw at the major, it was like, oh, Chopper found the juice that he needed in order to actually make this roster exciting for me. And so it's just kind of a shame they're not in the blast circuit, or they're not guaranteed a spot in Pro League either, because I think that they're gonna wreak havoc in the tier 1.5 scene.
Yeah, I think Spirit's an interesting one because they got Wonderful win, and we thought so much of the team was Dexter. And now I almost sit here and wonder, do I need to give like Chopper some credit for how he's setting up his AWPers and how he's calling? That's the question for me, actually, is how much of it is Wonderful asking to play the game he wants to play it because he is still so young. And when I watched a couple of his demos, I got the vibe that in the future, I would like to see him get a bit more assertive at times. But obviously, that can come with time. And clearly, he was looking pretty promising as an AWPer, which I think is all you need at this stage for this team. So I'd agree. I'm excited to see where Spirit go. I think it's been an interesting journey with Chopper too. I think there was a period of time where a lot of people thought that Chopper wasn't a good IGL and that he just had really skilled players and that he was just there. And there was almost like a bit of Chopper hate going around. But I feel like he's getting his plaudits on this team now. I think he deserves them.
Yeah, I think that people are just so reactionary in this scene. I think that's fair to say. Like with people like Chopper, it's like he does well at the major, and everybody's like Chopper, top 5 IGL of the year. It's like, really? Like, are we gonna really say that? You know, when it felt like the first major that they did well at was more like Dexter and Patsy popping off, and Magic's actually doing very well, and then the second one, a kind of a similar story, like Wonderful. Like, I'm not sure necessarily if I think it's the Chopper system. Like, I'm not sold on that idea. I'm very sold on like the Cadian, the James system, Kerrigan. There's a bunch of people I'm very sold on, but Chopper is kind of a guy where it's like they were, to give some context to this, in I think it was 2020 or 2021, Spirit were experimenting with a 6-man lineup. And when they were doing that, they actually took Chopper out
Yeah.
on Overpass. Like they were like, we don't need the IGL of the team. And so I think behind the scenes and kind of what has been shown, like they actually removed Chopper from Spirit for a brief while, and then they just had to bring him back. Like that happened too. And I think like the people around Chopper are not necessarily praising him. And that's kind of like, that's a bad sign for me when no one on Spirit is saying like, yep, Chopper's just coming up with all these ideas. It's all him in the lab. Like, he's the one putting it together. It's more like Magix and Patsy and everybody finding ways to contribute. I'm sure Chopper is helping Wonderful, but I don't know that he's actually unlocking the fullest of his potential, because you even said like he's not doing as much as it seems like his skill would allot him to do.
I think I will go with my team to watch quickly. I think I'm just gonna pick Fnatic. I think they're a safe pick here. They've just got a lot of nice things about them right now. Obviously, we're getting to see how Mezzy will progress as an IGL. I think he's already doing a solid job, which we agree with, and he's also always going to be a solid player. That's never not going to be the case. I think he does still cool around himself a bit, but I think that's fine because he is good as a player, so it's warranted. And then you have the potential for Fasha also, who is, I think, someone who has just incredible aim. This guy, mechanics-wise, could be really, really up there. If he can just put everything else together, I think he could be the standout and the big improvement that this team is waiting for. And then you just have players like Crims, who've just been around forever. You know what you're going to get from Crims. Roy, who is always just unsung and just so good at what he does. I feel like with Roy, it's almost like I don't think he gets that many highlight plays, but I feel like he's just always putting up numbers every game. So he maybe goes a bit under the radar, but he's just always good. He's just always good. This guy has been good for so long, and no one really talks about him. Yeah. And then Nico does well, you know, I'm not sure, but that's the one part we don't need, you know, we gloss over that.
Yeah, I mean, what's holding Fnatic back is probably Nico Dawes, but to actually give them some credit, I do think that Roy is a guy that a lot of people didn't really pay that much attention to until what he was doing with Copenhagen Flames caught everybody's eye at the majors. And what was interesting about that is because, like, when he was on when he was on Mad Lions, it was always people were talking about Bubsky, people were talking about even Acor a little bit more. There was always some other reason to not talk about him. Obviously, people talked about Hunden, and then when it was Sicilian, like the calling looked very good too. But then and even Shush was quite good on that team too. But Roy was like, what he's doing now for Fnatic and what he did on Copenhagen Flames as a space taker sort of player. What's great about him is that he's very reliable, and he's not actually like he doesn't go full-blown Yakindar. Like, he doesn't just fly at people usually. He kind of weaves a little bit more. He kind of judges the situation, and he's okay with not necessarily always fighting completely, like giving his life for all the space always. Like, sometimes he'll just assess it and be like, I don't think this is like the way into the round. And I think that's something that is super valuable because it depends on the team, right? Like, if you have a team that's very one note, then maybe you have to do that. But I think he actually understands that Fnatic can slow the round down very well, and that he's confident in the mid rounding. Like, that's something that's impressed me a lot about Fnatic, is that they're very willing to slow the round down, which is something I don't necessarily always get from new IGLs. Like, new IGLs a lot of the time just want to call something out of spawn. They want to just like maybe have like one layer to the strat, like map control, then go, right? And then with Fnatic right now, I've seen them mid round a couple times successfully, and that's something that for a new IGL, it's impressive. But it also, Mezzy did give Roy credit. He said Roy sometimes is the one that's giving him information to make a better decision in the round. So that's something that I think like Roy is showing even though he's not like a veteran of tier 1, he's older, and I think he's just more centered. I think that's how I'd put it. So that's always something that's going to be really helpful. Okay, best body language. So obviously this is something that when we are watching, it's all kind of just based off of what we get from webcams. It's what we get from those shots that the production decides to show us after a round, or sometimes it's what we get on the webcam at the bottom of our screen live during a round. And there's a lot of people in the space with bad body language, and I'll talk about those people too. But who do you think, Hawka, had the best body language? Who would you want to sit next to if you were playing on a stage?
Okay, for what it's worth, I was like, these just got sent over to me by Maui, and I was like, I don't know if I've thought about this that much. I'm like, okay, I need to take some time. And then I feel like I couldn't think of anyone that stood out for like just subtle body language and just being calm. So I just went with what might be the obvious one of Dexter, just because of his slaps. I think it's genuinely, like, I know it's a meme, but I do think there's genuinely something to it where if you look over and you see your teammate just, slapping down on those hats, like it is going to do something to the team. I think it does pump them up nicely. And I don't, honestly, I don't really know if I look at general body language enough to know when a guy's just like looking really calm, composed, confident all the time. So I feel like you're going to have to take over your expertise on this one. It sounds like maybe it's a Mauisnake award to like give out right here.
Okay, the guy that I would give it to, and he really impressed me this year with his body language, was Drop on Furia.
Wow.
Because
yeah.
Furia is a team where tension runs high. Everybody is stressed all the time. You can tell that everybody is like almost outside of themselves when they're playing on that team. Like Art is like, sometimes he's speaking at a mile a minute, but Drop always looks very composed. And I noticed one thing that he does himself when he gets stressed, he doesn't take it out on anything. He doesn't start yelling. What he does is he starts rubbing his temple with his temples are like he rubs a couple different places. I've noticed he rubs a couple different places on his face. Sometimes he'll rub the side of his temple, and sometimes he'll rub right between his eyebrows. Like he'll just like start just kind of like if you're watching the YouTube on this,
like his third eye.
It is just
My God.
where your third eye would be. He starts pressing that and just rubbing, and I find that so soothing and calming, because when they're on highs, or even when they lose a round, he's still very willing to give out the high fives. They're not overly aggressive. He's not hurting anybody. It's not like Dexter is kind of hurting his teammate. I think that Flames has been literally like bruised before by this. Not actually, but I think the fight, or like the that spirit that Dexter shows is sometimes too much. Like sometimes I don't want my hand to sting after a high five, like that might be something where I actually hold it against Dexter, but I think Drop, he knows exactly the right amount to give. And I also think that he's never outwardly projecting his frustrations, which is very important on a team like Furia.
Wow. That was a really in-depth answer. I'm impressed by that. And I also fully agree. As soon as you said it, I was like, damn, that makes sense. Like thinking of the major, especially.
Yes, yeah. I would give my second place to Kerrigan. I think that just as a... Like, what Kerrigan embodies is more than just an in-game leader. He's a captain of the team, and that really comes out when he is in the middle of the FaZe clan. Like, he'll just... I think, like, what he does very well that has actually helped FaZe a lot this year is he knows how to play on a stage. He knows how to play on a crowd. And I think that everybody is emboldened by his presence, so much so that I wanted to give Kerrigan this at kind of knee-jerk, but then when I really thought about like the full picture of what I would want sitting next to me, it's kind of both of them. Drop and Kerrigan both do a good job. It's kind of like very different roles though, and I almost just... There was such an underdog factor for Drop for me in this that I might be giving him my number one. But if you want to give it to Kerrigan, I think that's also incredibly fair. The other side of this though is people that are more polarizing, and they got both sides of this. So I actually have a few other people that I was considering, but I wouldn't necessarily say they were like best body language. Like they gave a lot of body language, and those are people like Cadian, those are people like Nafany and Apex. Like they do a lot. Yeah. I think Apex, if you had to give an award for who gives off the most body language, it's Apex. But is it the best body language? There is a resounding no to that. Like you've seen what Apex does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I also agree with you that I didn't have the ability to think on your level. So I kind of just went with Dexter because it's like the most out there, the most flashy body language. It's the first thing that sprung to mind. But yeah, I'm glad you came through with the real takes.
Okay, and the last award is one Hawka came up with. We're gonna give out our best and worst jerseys of the year. So, Hawka, I'm sure you have some thoughts about this one. There have been many jerseys in the space. There's been a lot of pandering too, if you want to include what happened in Rio. But who do you have as your favorite jerseys?
Yeah, I was looking through, and I actually think just for how clean it is, the Mao's jersey I'm seeing right now, I quite like. It's just very clean, and maybe it could do with a bit more color. Maybe it could do with a bit more of the Mao's color on there, I will say. But just as like a really nice, just clean. It knows what it's doing. It's got a little bit of subtle gray in there. It's not going for anything too crazy. It's solid. I think it could do like some nice red stripes on the sleeve or something, because it doesn't scream mouse to me, is the only thing. But I think it's nice and subtle, and I like that. And honestly, some of the other ones are pretty mid. So
Yeah.
that's what stood out to me.
Okay, my favorite jersey, I've got a couple. I've got a couple, but one of them I actually really didn't think I would like given the rebranding, but then it started popping for me is NIP. I'm kind of surprised that this one grew on me pretty well. I would say the way that the sleeves kind of are like an oscillating sound wave, or the just ring of circles on the sleeves, it actually works surprisingly well for me, and I think that it's a nice contrast given that the rest of the jersey is black, and it's almost kind of like a warning signal. It looks like basically if there's an alert or something, it's going to draw attention. I don't necessarily know if I would love to go out wearing it necessarily, but I think that when they're wearing it on stage, you can really, when you're on stage, all you can see of a player usually is their chest and above. So if there's something going on that's interesting in that sort of space, then I think that you've actually succeeded with your jersey to draw enough attention, and it actually does stay true to their colorway. Do I think it necessarily fits the NIP theme? No, not really. But like, I think that it's just something that they decided to experiment, and I appreciate people that do that in a way that comes across as somewhat tasteful, because there's a couple people that put out here a couple jerseys that are different, or like they decided to experiment, but I don't know if they necessarily pulled them off. And I think one jersey that also is kind of like it's doing something, but it's also like very subtle about it, for example, is OG. Like they do this thing where they have these colors on their collars where it looks like they're wearing almost like a polo, but I almost am like, just bring out a polo, just wear a polo.
I know, right?
Just like you're kind of like selling us on this falsehood that they're wearing something that's like a button up shirt, but it's actually just a jersey that decided to color things, and it almost kind of reads like wearing a piano key necktie t-shirt or something. Like you're just like faking it. You're not even actually wearing it, you know? So, or like those t-shirts where people have like six-pack abs just drawn on them, and it's like, it's kind of like just go the full distance and put them in polos like the old Gambit jerseys, right? So that's why I like NIPs. It sticks to the whole, it's a jersey, but it has a very unique motif.
Nice. Yeah, there's something about that OG jersey that, for me personally, kind of reminds me of the shirt I had to wear in primary school. Which I think it's that collar for some reason.
Yes.
Reminds me of that, and for some reason, I just hate it. I really hate it. I just can't. Yeah.
And I will give a subtle shout out, because this is the one jersey I wanted to buy this year, is the Outsiders t-shirt. I want the Outsiders t-shirt. I want Outsiders Jame. I want Outsiders Jame, just the t-shirt itself. And if Outsiders are hearing this, I would take Outsiders Jame. I take Outsiders Flit. I don't really want Norbert on my shirt, but I would also take Outsiders Fame. I think that's kind of just a cool shirt. Like, people are gonna read that. Like, imagine you wear a shirt that says Outsiders Fame. People will just think that's a new streetwear brand. You know, like that's like,
honestly, yeah.
It's kind of clean too, and also I actually like the little cross they do in the O of it. It's very subtle. It's like just an off like blue. It's kind of like a light bluish color, but I think they did a good job with those t-shirts of making them. It's austere, you know. It says a lot by saying very little, and that I appreciate that kind of work too.
I feel like theirs is better than quite a lot of the actual organization's jerseys, which is not a good thing, honestly, because I don't
Yeah.
know what these other organizations are doing, but hey, good on Outsiders. Good job.
Okay, that will wrap up our year-end awards. Now we wanted to talk about one movie that really caught our attention this year. It was released 9 months ago from the time of this recording, but we both saw it in the latter half of the year. It is everything. Wait a second. It is everything
Get it.
everything everywhere all at once. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. And this is a movie that I think both of us really enjoyed, but I wanted us to just break this one down a little bit. For some of the specifics on this one, it obviously featured a strong like Chinese cast. The directors were two guys named Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. It did pretty well in the box office, grossing over 100 million, but I'm pretty sure it was an A24 release. So
Yeah.
if people are familiar with that distributor, they're the people that came out with a lot of kind of what people would say is like their first foray into independent film. Like Ex Machina is one, for example. Moonlight. I think these are a lot of like those kind of alternative films that people have caught over the last decade or so, but they came out with another banger. And I actually think this might be my favorite A24 film thus far. Hawka, I want to know from your perspective, like what were your impressions of this one?
I'm so rarely in a scenario where I feel like I could genuinely recommend this movie to everyone, and I think anyone would enjoy this movie to an extent. Like some people are going to enjoy it way more, but even if you just watched it casually and you didn't get like much of a profound memory from it, you'd still enjoy it just for what it is. It's got like nice comedy moments. I think there's clearly like some Jackie Chan inspiration with some of the action,
Yeah,
which I
yeah.
enjoyed. I think they did a really good job with that. There's like some Matrix vibes, I would say, for sure, just in the overall how the multiverses work. And this is the thing for me, was that I watched this movie after watching the Marvel Doctor Strange movie, which also did multiverses,
Yes.
but it just didn't use the multiverse concept in any interesting way. Whereas this film uses it. I actually don't know how this film goes into so many different multiverses, goes into so many different like threads and strands, and it feels like it's spreading out, and I feel like they're just gonna lose it all. And then they like bring them all back together at the end, where these
Yes.
other universes that were initially introduced as almost like comedic universes can now come across as really serious. Some of the serious ones can become comedic, and the way that works is actually like masterful in this movie.
Yeah, this one to me was like it was at times absurdist, but it held on to your heartstrings. Like they were still gonna control your emotions a bit, and despite like the imagery, it was surreal. I want to praise the editing in particular. Like sometimes it was just boom, 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 like flashing. Like it was going so quickly. At sometimes I thought this is gonna lose me. This is like if that's not done tastefully, if the editing is just like a little bit off, it can feel very bad. Like there are a lot of films that have come out in the last few decades that if they don't edit that as sharp as they did in this one, you will lose the plot entirely. You're gonna just start feeling like this is just a bunch of like jumbled shit. But it never came across as that, and that's why it was so impressive to me as well. And also, and that recommendation thing, like, yeah, I don't see many people that would have like too hard of a time with this one, because it's emotional. It takes on some philosophical topics. It takes on modern relationships, familial bonds, and on top of that, it's just jam-packed with action in a way that you wouldn't normally expect. And I really hope that this sets off a trend of movies to come for the future. I'm for one, like, I'm on the same train as you. Like, I'm done with these like Marvel multiverse type things. Like they've kind of become to bore me. I don't think they're using them in very many interesting facets. And yet this one was able to just like, they were so close to going overboard, but they never did. And that's something that I have to give them a lot of praise for, because it's just so tough once you start introducing multiverses to lose the plot. And like a lot of people, for example, when they watched Interstellar, they told me I didn't really get it at the end. I don't really understand why he was in that sort of, this is obviously a spoiler. I don't get why he was in the fourth dimension. I don't get why he was like looking at her, pushing a book over or whatever. How's that even possible? But with with Everything Everywhere All at Once, what they did so well is that they kind of like introduced it so early that you never felt like they were going overboard, because you already knew there was already such a precedent set that you never were like, oh, that's just too crazy for me. It was crazy from the beginning, so you know the universe you're in.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also it's almost like kind of video gamey the way they set it up, which I think a lot of people watching this pod will probably appreciate. I think you'll be able to pick up on it really quickly. I also think that the question here is, do we get into spoilers at any point?
Yes, let's do
spoilers. I feel like we do need to give the warning.
The disclaimer,
for that if we want to.
Spoiler disclaimer is now. If that's our selling it to you guys, but go to the next interview in this podcast if you just want to avoid the spoilers, because all we're going to talk about for the rest of Hawka is this. Okay.
Sweet. Okay. Yeah, I think the thing that actually hit me most personally was I think both of the parents' acting is just incredible. I think the acting all round is great. But for me, I assumed I would relate more to the like teenage character who is meant to be going through this existential sort of thing. I don't think I really related to that as much. And maybe this is just because I don't know. Maybe it's because it's based on you personally, because I know I'm pretty close with my parents. But for me, it was that like the moments with the parents that really got me in a big way. I don't know if you're going to know the scene I'm thinking about, but the scene of the dad saying the speech where he goes, in another life, and he's talking about, in another life, I'd have loved to have just like been with you and just had a laundromat with you. That scene, oh my God, I was bawling. I was actually bawling my eyes out at that scene. Like that just hit, that just hit so hard in that moment for me. Yeah, that scene just wow. Just wow.
Yeah, that was one where they were using the multiverse of her like being an actress that learned kung fu for her
and
movies.
He's really successful too.
Yeah, he's doing well in his own right, and it shows that, you know, if they never got together, they would have actually both succeeded in their careers. But I think that is actually something that's rather poignant in how I've actually experienced life. Like I myself actually have like really dove deep into like career focus, but at the cost is kind of like losing out on some friendship. Like I'm not losing friendships, but it's more like, you know, they're more distant, and I think that's very fair, and it's something that's really relatable for a lot of people. When you dive really deep and you start finding success in your career, you're probably not going to have the same relationships and everything, and that was very well demonstrated in that moment. So on top of that, I think one scene that I really liked is I was shocked at the rock scene where there were two rocks
oh my God,
on the cliff, and I, as soon as that scene flashed, I was like, I know what's going on. Like they're both rocks. Like that's what it is. And then and I kind of thought this is gonna be a joke. Like in the beginning, I actually laughed. I was just like, this is so ridiculous. But then I couldn't believe how much I found myself invested in what these rocks were saying to each other, and how the mother was like kind of like creeping over with stop motion animation or something. Like it was like a stop motion effect that they used to bring the mother close to the daughter, and then like the daughter was like, no, don't get away from me or whatever. And then when they both rolled down the cliff together, it was like also a very touching moment in a way that I just like. It's so hard to even imagine how you come up with that, because you think like surely this is too ridiculous to make them both rocks, because then there's no life, but it worked. the raccoon ratatouille part also was utterly hilarious. That was so good.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I remember thinking after the movie about that rock scene and thinking to myself, if you took me out of context, you just cut the rest of the movie out, and someone was just watching me watch two rocks on a screen with some text there, it's like, how is that going to make me emotional? And yet, like in that context, it all makes so much sense. Whereas out of context, I'm sure you would just think of me as crazy because I'm looking at two rocks on a bloody screen.
Yeah.
Damn. And yeah, because they almost set the vibe of the other multiverses being jokey to begin with. They're more jokey, and that's when you do get suddenly the juxtaposition of that, I think, hits even harder when you get emotional moments in those other universes.
I want to touch on the kind of like central theme for the daughter was that after she went through all the multiverses and the iterations possible for how her life could have went, she started developing this like nihilistic viewpoint, which culminated in creating what I call Tebagle of Doom XD. When people have like nihilistic viewpoints, and usually when they're demonstrated in media, I kind of find myself losing a little bit of interest, because I personally like don't I get nihilism, but I feel like the answer, at least when I studied, like I studied philosophy in college, like
Mm.
is sort of like nihilism is a very real feeling, but it's also kind of pointless in its own right to even believe
Yeah, I
that.
was gonna
So
say,
so just
yeah.
move on and just start, like, why wouldn't you just flex a little harder and just start doing crazy shit? Like she was kind of going on a rampage through all the universes and just killing people, it seemed like. But like there's so much more you could do than just being a destructive force, and I feel like that's just such a almost like misguided way. But I guess that's kind of the reaction she has from living with her mother, who at the time was kind of very distant emotionally from her, so she chose destruction as opposed to anything else. I almost just don't feel like her sorrow was deep enough that she should have found herself on this path to try to end the entire universe and all the other universes. So that was like one thing that I drew into a little bit of question, but I think that it still developed into a great story. So if it's kind of a plot device, I'll give them a pass there, but I didn't love that part personally.
Mm. Sure. I also I think it's quite interesting how I feel like the dad almost doesn't have much of a character arc in his universe. Weirdly,
Mm.
at the end of the movie, he's kind of basically the same as he was at the start. And it's almost to show that in this universe, he was kind of just content the whole time, right? It's like, this is the universe where I got this, I got that. I'm actually just kind of happy the whole time. Whereas it's the other characters who almost, through seeing his viewpoint weirdly, have to go on this character arc, which I think is kind of a cool way of doing things. Because normally, if you'd have said this character doesn't actually go through an arc, it wouldn't have felt right. But you almost get that through some of the other multiverses, like the one where he's technically successful but clearly not as happy, right? Which
Hmm.
I thought was an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, you almost want
Oh,
to think. Oh yeah, go.
I was just going to say also, just this is a small side point, just that whenever I hear people talk about like movies being too woke or whatever, I feel like this is a great example where it's like it's never about the movie being quote unquote woke. It's about the writing and everything else in the movie and having characters that make sense. Because in theory, this could have been a movie that like tried to shove whatever down your throat and blah blah, and it never feels like that. It never feels like forced in that way because everything just feels real and it's just a really well done movie, which I also appreciate because the amount of times you see the reaction online to, oh, this is a woman's movie or something, they've just put loads of women in the movie. It's like, what are you talking? Like, that's not what's going to make a movie good or bad.
No,
I just had to get that out there just because I know over the internet sometimes people have interesting takes.
yeah, okay, 2 points. One is that I almost, based off of your character development assessment of the father, I would have actually assumed that this movie were written by a woman, but it actually is written by a guy, because and then the growth you see is obviously in the mother, in the daughter the most. So usually people
Mm,
write deeper roles or deeper development for their own gender, because they kind of can draw off of their own experience. So that's kind of a unique point, that the guy was kind of like almost the most one dimensional of everybody, but, or the father, that is. But the other thing about the wokeness is that, yeah, I think like the only kind of like thing you might say is woke in this is the fact that the daughter was a lesbian, and so some people might be like, why are they doing that? But it's like, that wouldn't have
yeah.
mattered in any, like, that
Yeah.
could have just as easily been she's too young, and then they're upset because she has a boyfriend or something like that. Like, the same, I've seen the same thing used as a plot device
Hmm.
in older movies. Like, it's just like, you're not ready to have a boyfriend yet, it's or something like that. Like, that's kind of almost the exact same situation of the mother was like, her father was like, no, I don't want you with him. I don't know if it was because of age, but people, like, that's not forcing any kind of agenda down your throat or anything like that. Like, we're like, so yeah, I don't really think there's anything to say about the wokeness. I guess like it had a very heavy Chinese cast, and I also don't, I think that's just whatever, like, it's cool because I think
Yeah, exactly.
it told an interesting story of like people in like an LA suburb. And I think, like, honestly, if you just kind of took a random suburb in LA and just said, let's just write a story about this family, it's probably going to either be Latino, Chinese, or white. Like, that's just like by the numbers, those are the biggest demographics there. And so it's almost, it didn't matter to me what ethnicity they were. I guess the translation thing was kind of a fun aspect. I could have, like, That's one thing actually where this film probably wouldn't have worked if it were just like what Caucasian Americans, because then you probably wouldn't have had that sort of like mistranslation thing, and that was kind of a funny concept, or a little way that they were able to further the miscommunication that was going on in the movie, which actually was kind of important. So yeah, overall, let's do ratings. Let's do ratings of this to close this out. Okay, so I would give, and I rate things on a 4-star basis. I don't know how you rate movies or anything like that, but this is what Roger Ebert used to do, who was like the critic that I like the most, and he rates every movie on a 4-star thing. I would give this 3.5 stars out of 4.
Okay, so I normally just rate movies out of 10. Just
okay,
blanket.
Go for it. Go for 10. That's fine.
The thing is, I said to you, I think when I first watched it, I was like, this might just be my favorite movie ever.
Oh, okay.
And I think I need to rewatch it to know, because there's a couple of other movies up there, but it's really up there for me, just with everything it did. And I think for whatever reason, it at that moment in my life, it did just like hit me for whatever reason. So that's obviously also going to have a part to play in this sort of movie. Like if you're a moment in your life where you specifically resonate with any of the things, I mean, I'm sure people could resonate even more with stuff like I'm not an immigrant, for example, I'm not from an immigrant family, and I still was able to like connect in this way with the characters in this movie. So yeah, it's got to be like, I don't know, like a 9.5 for me. If it's gonna be one of my favorite movies ever, I don't see how I couldn't rate it that.
Yeah, I mean, if it's your favorite, it's okay to give things a 10. Like I've given a lot of movies 4 out of 4s.
I need to give it a rewatch. I need to.
Okay, yeah,
that's what I need to do.
All right, get on it. Thank you so much.
I will.
Thank you so much, Hawka, for hopping on. I think this was a really fun conversation. Really interesting turn we took to just talk about this movie in depth. Yeah. But I think it's a good one at that. So yeah, appreciate you being here. Appreciate all your insight on these awards. These are going to go down in history, and everybody that is actually receiving an award, I'm mailing them a trophy. No, I'm not. I'm not doing that. Not mailing anybody any damn trophies. But thank you so much, Hawka.
Thanks for having me.
The second guest in today's episode is Mel, having most recently been the star and in-game leader for Cloud9 White, and arguably the best female player that the game has ever seen. Having won 7 championships across the Game Changers and Ignition series, we talk about what it takes to get to the top and stay there. We also talk about how it's not just enough for Mel to be dominant in the women's scene, and how her aspirations run deeper. Also, she'll tell you exactly why women like Valorant more than they like Counter-Strike. We're here for the Mauisnake show with a very special guest in Mel. You may know her for her tenure with Cloud9 White, where she was rolling through the North American scene. We're going to get to Berlin, but first, we're going to talk about some of our origin story, because we actually have known each other, Mel, for quite some time. We actually met at Fragadelphia 12 in 2018, and you were an observer back then. So what's tell me like a little bit about the beginning of this journey, because I don't know if this is usually the route people take, because don't people usually try to play first and then they realize they can't play very well and then they get into observing? But you went the other direction. You went from an observer to a bona fide star.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say. Thank you. We were babies back then. I'm just thinking about it. We were literally babies working like one of our first events in like this little booth at Frag 4 years ago. Oh my God. Such different times.
We were just like sitting in the back and just kind of chilling, watching. I think it was, who won it? I think it was like Yay, a team with Yay and Freakazoid.
Dude, if it was Yay, everything has come full circle. If it was Yay,
I think it was.
There's no way.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Way.
I'm pretty sure. So a lot of people that were at that, actually, I'd be curious to know, because it was a North American CS event, how many people switched over to Valorant since then. It's probably like 60+%.
Dude, I would go as like 80%.
Yes.
I would actually go as high as 80%. That's such an insane thing to think about. What was it considered frag? I don't know what frag it was, but regardless, we were like babies. But normally it is the other way around, because like my role model, as you may or may not know, is Sapphire, who was like a player back 1.6 CSS, and then she switched to observing, because it's like, when you're a player, it kind of informs who you watch and the decisions you make. And I'm sure, as an analyst who was like a pro player before, a very high level player, like you have analysis maybe some others can't like key into because you've been in those environments. So it makes logical sense, right? But for me, it was the opposite, because when you're observing, it feels like I'm paid to just watch the game all day, which is kind of akin to like watching VODs all day. And when you want to tell a story, you should know what the hell you're talking about and what story you're covering. So I'm starting to like watch these teams for like hours and hours, probably like hundreds of thousands of hours observing, and I'm just like understanding what they're doing after a certain point. And with like the fundamentals of CS being pretty similar to Valorant on like a macro level, it kind of just made like perfect sense for me to make that switch.
Yeah, and I think that it's something that you took up the IGL role for C9 Wide. So I think that when you're someone that's kind of in the backseat, kind of watching, like you just start absorbing all of that knowledge. And I think that actually to relate today, when I actually boot up into a Faceit game, I kind of weirdly understand situations better than I should because even though I'm not playing as much anymore, it's just that I'm watching, I'm consuming so much Counter-Strike, so I kind of know the game sense is there and everything. But I think what's really special about observing is that you kind of have to predict the action a lot of the time. And so I think
Exactly.
that really probably helped you a lot in at least building that foundation, like you're saying, to understand tac-fps at a very high level, because you're probably putting together the story of how the round is going to build out, where the next contact is, who should be the next one that's initiating.
Exactly.
So you would say that that surely helped you when you moved into becoming an in-game leader, even in another game.
100%. I think it would have helped even if I didn't want it to. Like, even if I didn't purposefully watch those games trying to be like, okay, I want to be an IGL, like, which I was towards the end of it, I was purposely watching them more intently. But even if I wasn't, like, I would just like passively dream about the game. Like, literally just because of how many hours I'm throwing at observing, literally, I just subconsciously consume it and it's just in my brain somewhere. So even if I didn't try, it would still get absorbed either way.
You can't really help it unless you just don't give a shit about your job. like if you,
No,
if you literally have to just like full like just zombie mode, just press buttons and not care. But like I know you wouldn't be doing that. I wouldn't expect
Who in esports doing that?
Yeah, no one
Honestly.
if you're in this industry not caring, you're in the wrong industry because it's already hard enough. So you better care about what you're freaking doing. Okay, so I wanted to kind of talk about your switch to Valorant, or what when you tried it out, because obviously it was a new game on the block. A lot of people were starting to take it up. I tried it for a little bit. I felt it out as I was and I kind of like, you know, I didn't fall in love with it right away, which is why I'm still in CS to this day. But I see
Shocker.
yeah, I think that like I look back at your Wikipedia and I saw that you played in a few of the smaller tournaments here and there. You were trying to see if you could play like at a competitive level, but then where do you think you saw a future for yourself as a player in this?
I think immediately when Valorant came out is when I knew I had like a future in this game, because CS when I like got into like competitive CS, I mean we all played the thousands of hours of CS, like pugging MM, ESCA if you're Deddy, or face at like level 10, and you're just kind of chilling playing the game, right? But like the thought of going pro in CS so late in the game when I had like 3K hours, knowing that generally speaking, like all the like semi-pro, like even MZL players have at least 10K hours. And you can say that advanced players who they're trying to break into that like upper echelon have at least 10K hours. And I just knew that my time was low key up. I feel like I was like, if I wanted to do anything in CS, it would be observing. I wouldn't be able to play, even though I really liked the game strategically. And so when Valorant came out and I realized that a lot of like the same macro concepts and fundamentals applied, I was like, dude, the game just came out. Like, this is literally my chance to like do something and go pro. This is like my one chance that I probably get in my life to completely like just fall in love with the game and dump a ton of hours and be at like the same level as other people playing the game, which isn't like exactly true, because obviously people that had 10K hours in CS and were former CS pros kind of had an edge when it came to like the fundamentals of Valorant early on. But in my head, it seemed kind of like a flat, you know, everyone just starts at square one type beat.
Yeah, it evened the playing field, you could say.
Exactly.
Because everybody was learning the abilities and kind of the meta of the game as it was evolving from ground zero. I would actually, okay, I want to actually dive in a little bit about what made you fall in love with it, because you've obviously dedicated so much time to it. And I guess I'll speak from my own experience. When a lot of people, such as myself, try to transition from CS to Valorant, there's a few things that I think some of us didn't like immediately, like maybe mechanical ability, like the mechanics of the game itself, kind of like the spraying versus I feel like tapping is a lot more prevalent in Valorant, or like first bullet accuracy has to be really good. I would say kind of the abilities. And so what on your side made Valorant so interesting to you, or made it a game that you could fall in love with?
I think everyone says this, but you know, I won't be the first or the last, but I like the difference in like abilities. I feel like that completely kind of turn everything on its head. Well, it's very similar. It's some things are very similar to CS. You have like the flashes and the smokes to cut off sight lines and like, you know, nades that do damage. But obviously it takes us like the next level and actually like layers on top of that already existing like framework. And so I always loved that offer rep. That was like super interesting to me, how you could play different agents. And I mean, that's honestly the big appeal of the game. But I see what you're saying with the mechanics. I actually really liked the mechanics. I was never really the best sprayer in CS, so this might be really biased. I was never really that good at like the recoil control. I don't know why. I think it's the way my hand legit just like works. But I really like the fact that you could just like, it was super rewarding to have like insane, like, you know, strafe to the left, hit 2 shots, kill them, straight to the right, like one step, and then shoot 2 bullets. And like, it was just like so satisfying. It feels like it was really rewarding, good gunplay. Although it was definitely a learning curve coming from CS where people are moving at Ferrari speeds, and in Valorant people are moving like snails, bro.
Yes.
Like, they're really moving like snails across the screen. But in a sense, it's like a lower, I guess it's easier to get into. Like people that weren't so like super mechanically gifted in like CS, you could kind of have like a good, you can go pretty far in Valorant without having like any insane mechanics. But I feel like it still is super rewarding at like a very high level where, like I was talking about, like the how it rewards people that are like burst strafing and burst tapping is super cool.
It's kind of just rewarding a different skill set. I think that's safe to say. When you made the jump from like a kind of like you're trying the game out, you're playing under this magical banner, and then you win that FTW Summer Showdown over, I'm pretty sure it was Potter's team, if I'm not mistaken. And was that a big turning point for you in terms of, because I know you were signed pretty shortly after that with Cloud9, and I went back to actually at some of your interviews, and I looked at, or I saw that you said you actually were reached out to by Cloud9 before that. And then once you got that, did that just like raise your stock, or you kind of knew that Cloud9 was where you wanted to go?
It definitely raised our stock winning that event because we had some org interest before. And going into it, it was really interesting because if you followed the scene in any capacity, you knew that we were one of the only teams that actually took this shit seriously. I don't know if I can cuss.
You can cuss. It's just it's just for YouTube and podcasts. It's fine. You can say whatever you want.
Sick. Yeah. Sweet. But after that, I'm not trolling. Any org you could probably think of that is like in any esport contacted us, like at the tier 1 level. Like every single one contacted us after we won that. And so our stock went up like crazy. Like before, I was legit begging to get signed to orgs. Like I was getting egoed by orgs that were offering us like 1.5K. I was getting egoed. Like they were telling me like, yo, send me your metrics. And I came up with this whole like spreadsheet and this slideshow, and I gave it to this guy, and he's like, okay, give me your deck. I gave him my deck, and then he hard egos me. He's like, this is not industry standards. This is not how you present a deck, blah, 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 blah. 2 months later, we win FTW Showdown and get signed to Cloud9, and I was like, fuck you, man. Fuck your industry standard. You were giving me like $1,000.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That must feel good. That kind of payback, or just like leave that guy in the dust, whoever that was. What is it? What do you mean by a deck? What is that?
It's kind of like how you market your team. So you have like pretty pictures and pretty graphics of like, oh, like this is how many impressions, you know, my team gets on Twitter. This is like concurrent viewership total. These are the demographics that we like reach to and like stuff like that. But I sent him, you know, I went through painstaking effort getting all of our metrics together in like this sheet and this little slideshow. And this guy was just like, this is not industry standard.
Oh, really?
All right, bro. Well, your fucking org is an industry standard because you guys didn't sign us, and now you're gonna lose.
Yeah, I mean that guy is probably just reeling from that experience still, knowing that he could have signed what was the best like North American women's team for such a long period. Okay, so I want to talk about the extended period of dominance that you had over the North American scene, because you won 6 Game Changer events, you won the Ignition Series event, and I want to know, what did it take to be a champion so consistently? You were constantly thrashing, I think, like CLG Red, Shopify, Rebellion. But like people say that like a lot of champions talk about the fact that it's not always the first championship that's the hardest. It's staying on top because everybody is starting to look at what you're doing. They're adapting to the way that you play, and then but yet you still kept winning. So what kind of effort did that take?
It's really interesting because I think people sort of expect this really sophisticated, complex answer to this question. But for me and my team, honestly, we never even really looked at it as like, let's dominate like the women's team. Like, let's be the best women's team that we can be. We were always so much more focused on like the co-ed part of things. And we were always pushing ourselves to be like, dude, we need to be the best team we can be, period. Like we really didn't put so much stock in the GC scene. And even now when people, you know, like talk up like our accomplishments in the GC scene, to me, it feels really empty because I never got to accomplish a lot of like the co-ed ideas that we had in mind or any of the co-ed dreams that we had. And that stuff really makes me, that shit makes me cry at night, I won't lie. But for us, it was always about being the best team we could be. So we play in these co-ed tournaments and we get fucking smashed. And we'd be like, all right, guys, wait, what do we need to do better here? Because we just got destroyed. Like we can't be getting rolled like this. And so we would be super hard on ourselves and super critical because we weren't placing how we wanted to in these co-ed events. And I think holding ourselves to that really high standard is what put us really just above everyone else in the rest of the scene. And I won't lie, there are teams in GC that do play in co-ed tournaments, but I don't think any of them ever seen even like a margin of the success or like how far ahead we were in the co-ed scene compared to the other teams.
Okay, so you were basically judging yourself by a standard that is just all Valorant players, as opposed to trying to just be the top of the women's scene, and that in itself got you to becoming just kind of a side product of the fact, like that fact that you're trying to push yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. That's so you're let's talk about that a little bit then. You're trying to be the best overall player you can. I've heard you say this just now. I've heard you say it in interviews. Like you're striving to be the best overall player, professional that you can in any capacity.
Exactly, 100%. I think I know it sounds like really simple, but that alone sets us apart from so many teams because not just me on the team that thinks that, but everyone on Cloud9 Way had the exact same mindset. And any iteration, either with Annie or with Bob, we all had the same mindset. Is like we hold ourselves to such a high standard. Like we want to be the best players we can be, period. And we all want to be like the best player like in the world at one point. Right. So that's something that was really infectious on my team in a good way, not infectious like a disease, but
right.
You know what I mean? But even something as simple as that, like I think we had that edge over so many teams for so long. I would just look at other GC teams and I'm like, I just don't see it. Like I'm not seeing that drive, that energy. I'm not seeing that like holding yourself up to that high standard that we were. And it showed in results of co-ed tournaments and so on.
Yeah. I mean, I see that you guys were playing in quite a few, or at least you were playing in quite a few co-ed tournaments. Like I'm just looking at your results, and I'm seeing like you were playing in a lot of stuff. Period. Like you were always trying to better yourself. But let's take this then to the Berlin Championship that happened most recently, because I think going into this, a lot of people were propping you guys up as being like the best or second best team going into this, and obviously that ended up not being the case in terms of the result. You guys came in 4th place here, and I think that some people might have maybe put like G2 as one of those teams that maybe could have been the team that took the crown from you, or maybe was the best women's team overall, but actually you lost to G2 in the upper bracket, made your way a little bit through the lower bracket, and then lost to Shopify Rebellion, and you had beaten them so many times before that.
Yeah.
So I want to know, what do you think was the issue there? Because you lost in 3 maps, and I thought you guys were pretty good going into that. I watched a little bit of your stuff back, okay? Like I'm not going to come into this kind of interview and not like have any prep or not watch any games. I watched a little bit of like what happened on Haven there, and I feel like you guys were just getting really like they maybe changed how they played, or how did you read it from your perspective? I want to know that first.
Where to start? So first, I want to say like going to that tournament, we definitely were the overdogs. I think anyone that had followed GC in any capacity would confidently say we were the best team going to that. And that's like not even any hate to the other GC teams, because obviously it's like, oh, how can you say which team is number one? No one has even played each other yet. But the reason being was because we are the team out of all the GC teams probably in the world, not probably, definitely in the world. We've had the most like co-ed tournaments played. We've placed the best in co-ed tournaments. So we were like proven outside of the GC circuit, right? So that's why a lot of people felt that, and my team as well, let me make sure that's clear. We definitely thought we were the best team going to the tournament. That was like not like by any stretch of the imagination, like false or only an opinion. Like it was pretty much facts. Like if you look at how we played, the people we played, and from my experience, we were scrimming like, we were one of the only GC teams to like scrim tier 1 teams. Like when LCQ was around, we scrimmed every team in LCQ outside of like 2 or 3. And
wow.
we scrimmed Cloud9 Blue a lot going up into the tournament, and we were having some really productive scrims with them. We scrimmed EG. We were scrimming like franchise teams now. Obviously in the day, or not in the day, I'm saying like years ago, but obviously we didn't know who was franchised at the time in Berlin, but like after, like you kind of knew, right?
Yeah.
So we were looking really good actually in scrims, and like obviously on paper we were the best team going to the tournament. And like you said earlier, it's not just about like, you know, winning once, it's about keeping that title. And I feel like the international being 2 years at like the end of our dominance kind of fucking blew because at that point everyone already has so much about you, and it's like it's only, I feel like sometimes it's only like really a matter of time, but not to excuse our performance, but yeah, so it's 2 years of us being on top. Everyone knows that we're going to this tournament being the best, and so we had that pressure going into it that hey, like we're the best team here, we should win. And not only should we win, the expectation was to win like flawlessly. Like we should make it to upper finals, we should make it to finals, like not dropping a map. And on top of that, we shouldn't be dropping more than like 10 rounds. And we were kind of used to that level of pressure because in our domestic, like in our regional GCs, like that's the expectations. We know that we should stop every team. Like we should not drop more than 10 rounds, like ever really. But when it comes to the international where you don't know these teams, I feel like the pressure definitely got to us because that was something that we didn't really know how to expect. We didn't really know how to deal with it. Like actually I had to hop on like a call with a sports psychologist in the middle of the tournament because it was just a level of pressure I did not even like realize or thought, like I thought I could like understand it and I thought I could realize it, but it's, you don't really know how to deal with it until you're in that moment. And it's like, damn, bro, this is a lot. So I think pressure would be like number one of the first things I think that, you know, affected my team in one way or another. Everyone had their own form of it. For me, it was not only being like the best team, but also being like one of the more coveted players in GC, where a lot of people have been hyping me up to be this really great player. And on top of that, I just like, I'm looking at all the marketing, like all the Riot material, and it's like my face is on everything.
Yeah.
I'm in the music video. I was in the music video earlier this year. I've been on the desk. Like Riot has been inviting me to like a bunch of stuff, and I'm just like, you know, propped up to be like this really like star player of like the scene. So for me, that pressure was like really heavy on me to perform and to IGL like a very high level and to play, and to play at one of our like first LANs, because we really only had one LAN together as a team, and then COVID, and then we're like, damn, this is real. But I think for number one, it was the pressure. For number two, and this has always been prevalent in even co-ed tournaments and in our scrims, but number two, our skill floor is very low. Our skill ceiling, however, like I think still like that team, those 5 players, like if we had us on like a good day, we would be winning scrims against franchise teams. Like we would be like, I wouldn't say owning, but we'd be winning these scrims, and obviously Scrimbucks is Scrimbucks, but like that's actually huge if you're like a GC team, right? If you're a team made up of women, like, bro, when have you ever heard of that shit before? Especially in CS, which is where a lot of my teammates are from. Like to us, that was like everything. Like even these little scrims where we're playing franchise team, we would try so hard, and to like feel like it paid off by winning the scrim, it felt so good because all these like Redditors and shit like that, all these people in the scene are like, oh, women can never compete. But it's like, bro, look at one scrim, you'll see us. Like we're actually playing really well. Like we have a huge high skill ceiling. But when we're at our skill floor, oh my God, dude, it is awful. We were playing so poorly in Berlin. Like our comms were off, like our mech was off by people that we shouldn't even like have any problem like sitting down mechanically. We were getting sat down by them. And there was so much going on to where it's like, you can really only afford to have 2 bad days in a tournament. One bad day in a tournament. And we had 2 bad days in that tournament. And it's just, that's unacceptable. Like you can't be having that at the level we're trying to play at.
Yeah, when I watched some of it back, I felt like the first day you guys played against, say, Crew, it felt like you guys were just in your zone, nothing really was catching you off. And then I went forward to watch how you guys played against Shopify Rebellion, and it felt like when you say the comms were more hectic, you could kind of see that. Like sometimes getting into your post plant positions was a little bit messy. Like sometimes a smoke would fade and then someone would be out in the open, not ready for that smoke to fade. So this would be, I mean, you wouldn't mark that down to pressure, right? But like, I do want to know from your side of things, do you think that Shopify Rebellion, having played you guys so many times, maybe had some, like they probably had a better idea of your tendencies too in some way, but like, you guys were just kind of beating them over and over and over again, but like, was it just the pressure or was it them changing some things up too?
I'm trying to think back because even
it was a month ago, so yeah.
I think I will say I'm not sure if they necessarily anti-shredded us. I don't think Shopify Rebellion is a team that necessarily does like a lot of anti-shredding. My team, we like to have prep on teams. I I know not like it's interesting. A lot of GCS teams don't really do much prep, which I feel like is really underrated. Like you don't have to like hard anti-shred a team, but like super key tells like, yo, if this person's here, this is their setup. Why would you not get off that free info, right?
Yeah.
So we do that a lot to other teams. I'm not sure how much it really happens to us. It didn't really feel like an anti-shred diff, honestly, in the moment. But even if you look at the first map of our best of 3 against Shopify Rebellion, our first map, we had Fracture in the bag, and then we almost lost that map.
Yeah.
We were up like 12-4 or something, and we almost lost. Like that might have had us a little rattled, honestly. And it should have never gotten out of hand that much. I think Fracture is probably one of our, I want to say weaker maps, but it wasn't as strong as like our Haven. So when we won Fracture, we might have been rattled a little bit by their fake comeback, but it was pretty easy to gather the troops. The guys, like they had a fake comeback, their mentals in the dumps. We're going to our best map now, Haven.
Yeah.
Our best map. Like when we play this map in scrims against like franchise teams, like this is the map where we get like consistently the most rounds on. And we have a really good understanding of Haven. And then we played it out, and I don't know what I genuinely like. I don't think I've watched a couple rounds of Haven, but like that's sensitive for me because I have watched every other map from the event. I watched our obviously our match versus G2 because we had to watch that obviously if you wanted to get better for the event. I watched Fracture and I watched Icebox, and Haven is a map I have not looked at because like, bro, how did we lose that? Our best map by far. And that's the one we lose. I just remember a lot of retakes going wrong. I remember like our retakes are usually super solid on that map, but they were like going 1-1 with our util really well. And like we weren't able to do things that normally worked for us. And I feel like there was a certain point where we probably ran out of like ideas, honestly, which is something we never run into. But you know, in match environments, sometimes like things that are really obvious to you just like don't appear as easily as before.
Yeah, like zooming out and understanding what's actually going wrong in the moment is so much harder than it is if you're just a spectator. I personally actually looked at Haven much closer because it's the map that I understand the best, given that it was when I was like looking into the game more. I guess one thing that when you talk about the retakes that I notice, and I kind of want to, I actually just want your own tactical opinion on this, is that sometimes, for example, I think your Omen player would die, and like then it doesn't feel like there's a way to like guard the bomb. And what like in Valorant, the difference from CS, and I'm sure that there's some crossover viewers right here, is that like obviously anybody in CS could just throw the smoke. Like it doesn't really matter if you have the smoke, you throw it. But like, how does your game plan change in say like a retake or even a site hit if your smoke player dies?
On Haven specifically, that was actually the map I probably had the most mapped out in terms of like, so if we're retaking and this person's dead, this is what we're gonna do. And pretty much you just spam all these situations in scrims where it's like, okay, we have this person dead, now we're gonna retake a different way. And all these like small little protocols that you change that are a little bit different based on if someone is dead. But like still, like it only really affects your percent chance so much. Like let's say if we have all 5 alive, it's like a 5v4, 5v5 like retake at A. Generally speaking, we've drilled our A retake so much that we have a pretty like 80% chance of winning the retake, honestly, especially if they just hit the site early. We let them have the site. We let them burn all their util. They don't have much to one-to-one with us. And we have all of our util. We win them like 80, 90% of the time. Let's say our smokes player dies. Now we're winning it like maybe 50-50. So the thing is 50-50, it sounds pretty decent, but in a game like Valorant where you only have so many rounds, and it's like, if that 50-50 happens and you lose and it happens on a swing round, now you're on eco. And now they just keep spamming A hits, and now you're losing faith in your like A retakes. Now it's getting out of hand because in a match you only have so many rounds you can prove that you can fucking retake A properly with XYZ dead.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's kind of what I wanted to know there. Yeah. It's so different, obviously, coming from CS and thinking about it, because I guess you guys, it's just, you have to have those protocols set. You just have to have all these other types of strategies. The flowchart has to include a possibility of you not having this thing available to you. I want to know though, actually, for the sports psychologist you brought up in particular, that's something that I wanted to know. Like, people talk about this in like the CS:GO space. I'm sure actually basically every esport now, it seems like people are investing in sports psychologists. What did the C9 sports psychologist do for you specifically?
So I've worked with multiple different sports psychologists. Like C9 has one, his name is Gary, but I've worked with some external to Cloud9 just so I can kind of like get a feel for like what works best for me. But honestly, I think sports psychologists are really underrated resources for players to use. And that's like a really key detail is for players to use, because a lot of players, they have the resource of having a sports psychologist. Like they have one, the org like pays for them, or maybe like their agent pays for them, or in some way or another they're paid for. but they can't really like force you to get value out of it, if that makes sense. You need to like, you know, utilize it as if they were like actually a resource. You need to like talk to them. Like you need to actually put time aside out of your super grindy like pro player life and like talk to this person on like a weekly basis, or even just talk to them like at all and like open up to them about like your issues or your team's issues or like what you're struggling with. And then that's where you get the most value out of a sports psychologist, I find. Because honestly, it seems like they're a pretty like common resource that orgs provide now, but I feel like not every player, and I don't know about CS, by the way. I'm only speaking for like Valorant here. For Valorant, it really does seem like people make the much use of it. But I got a lot of use. Obviously, I wasn't working directly with the C9 sports psychologist at the time. You know, I was kind of like flipping between like a bunch of them. But for me, in the middle of the tournament, I kind of pretty much had this emergency meeting with this one sports psychologist, and it actually helped me so much in the middle of the tournament. Like it was right after we lost to G2, and my confidence was like shot, because it's like, when you're the team that's like number one going into an event and you lose to a team you never really should lose to. And I know I'm always going to be like painted as super cocky because I always say this about GC teams, but I'm always going to say this. I don't care. Like if it makes people mad, if it makes EU players mad, like I don't care. Like we should not have lost that event. And I'm not trying to disrespect other teams or take credit away from their accomplishments. G2 played really well. SR played really well. They were the better team that day. And obviously they were both the fucking finalists of the event. So, and G2 went on to win the whole thing. So I'm not trying to discredit them, but like, see it from my POV, it seemed that like holds ourselves to such a high standard. We're playing teams that have played like 2 co-ed tournaments total and like the last year and a half, 2 years. Like we should not be going to that losing, right? And so when we lost to that team, it felt like 5 losses. It didn't feel like one. It felt like I lost 5 times. Like, and I think, I don't know if it was Michael Jordan that said this in the Last Dance documentary, which I fucking love that documentary. It's such a banger documentary. You should watch it. If anyone here hasn't seen it, y'all need to watch it on Netflix. It is so good. But I remember he quoted that when you're a really good team, like when you lose to a bad team, it does not feel like 1, it feels like 5. It's so heavy. And so that's when I was like, okay, I need help psychologically, quickly. And so let me ring up the sports psychologist, and I took a lot of notes, and it helped me a shit ton. But again, that's like, it only helps you as much as you put into it.
It's kind of like, I would say, if you have the healthcare in most places to see a therapist, it's on you to go see the therapist, right? Yeah. So,
exactly.
So when you bring a problem to them, though, are they kind of reinforcing? Like, what I would imagine is that you go to them, you say, the weight of this loss feels like 5 losses. How do I pick myself up? Are they giving you, say, exercises to do, or like mental exercises, or are they just kind of running with you through things to calm you back down?
Honestly, in my experience, it was a bit of both with this guy, and I think it might fluctuate. Your experience or your mileage may vary based on which sports psychologist you go to. But with this guy, I pretty much told him like the same thing, like, hey, this feels like this dog shit. I was not expecting to lose this. We were the overdogs. We never should have lost, and my confidence is shot. And his response was kind of like giving me some techniques. Like he gave me like a breathing technique to use, and I actually ended up using it that entire weekend. Like literally, any moment that I could, I had like some anxiety in my stomach. I immediately was like, all right, let me do them breaths that he taught me. So for one, it was like definitely giving you like the tools and techniques. But a lot of them are kind of ones that I already had from meeting other sports psychologists. So it was also kind of like a reminder, which sounds really basic, like, oh, you're seeing a sports psychologist for like a reminder. But honestly, it's like the same thing as scrims, bro. Like you might make a mistake, like let's say you fuck up this thing in a post plant, and then you're really on top of it. And like a month or 2 go by, like 3 months, that you kind of like erode, your knowledge kind of erodes on it, and you need like a refresher, and then you need a reminder, like, okay, I made that mistake again, I got punished for it. I need to make sure I'm not making that mistake again. So it's just like reminders, right? But also from his experience, he was a competitor as well in his sport. I think it was like cross country. He was like world pro at it, and he kind of gave me his experience and shared with me his experience dealing with that kind of stuff and what helped him. And there's a lot of more abstract stuff at a certain point. He starts getting into sports psychology, a lot of like stuff that isn't as simple as like, oh, just do the square breathing or do this breathing where you're in 4 seconds, out 7 seconds. But it's more like, this is how you fuel your confidence. You need to add fire to your confidence, and you need to do X, Y, Z. And like the notes on it might sound a little crazy. It's something you have to kind of believe in, though. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I know myself that if one of the best things I've ever heard, I think this was like when I tried Taekwondo when I was really young, just that the exhale should be, it could be through your nose or your mouth, but it's so much better to inhale through your nose. Like don't inhale through your mouth at all. And I felt like
yeah, let's curse.
Yeah, it's, well, one is mouth breathing, but two, it's actually like something where it just feels way more calming. You find yourself in control, and also long exhales is another thing that I've personally done to kind of actually just help me relax. I think if anybody does it, you just like close your eyes and have a like deep breath, but then try to have a very long exhale, like, you know, make it, don't just breathe out all of it at once. You're gonna find your body just naturally finding comfortable positions, like especially right before you go to bed. I do this almost every night. If I can't fall asleep within 5 minutes, I just start doing deep breaths, and then before I know it, I've woken up and it's the next morning. So yeah.
Same. Every time I meditate, I'm on like the verge of sleeping. So that honestly
Yes,
makes
yeah.
sense. Like maybe I should start meditating before I go to sleep.
I think it helps. I mean, reading and meditating, but I want to bring this to something about kind of like Valorant in general, and I want to talk about the way that Valorant has been able to do such a great job at inviting such a wide range of players. And why the way I'm like really characterizing this is that there are so many more women playing Valorant than Counter-Strike, and it just seems like such a better community in general, like Galorant, or I don't know all the like the ways that women get involved in it, but it feels like there's a ton of resources. So I want to know from your perspective, why do you think that this has happened?
I think the number one biggest part probably is that like the developer themselves is putting in so much energy and like effort and marketing into game changers and like as an initiative, but also like the influencers that they bring on board for like their marketing are all like a lot of them were women, and also just like the marketing of the game itself is a lot more tailored to women and more palatable. I also think that, I mean, look at like the art design and like the art direction. It sounds like really simple, but really it's the most like simplest thing that captivates us. It's a lot more like endearing from like more like women agents. It's more like cartoony, and I feel like realism slash like milsim games are not as like, you know, palatable for like a women's audience, or at least it hasn't been. So the game just feels like it's purpose built to get more women to play this game. I don't know if that makes sense, and I could be pulling it out of my ass, but it really doesn't seem like a mistake. It seems like a very purposeful, intentional thing by Riot, and that's not just from how they approach and are spending money for the competitive GC scene, right? Which is obviously like that's a whole other thing entirely, is that the developer themselves is putting out this initiative and they are putting everything they want and everything they can into it. Well, I do think the prize pools can, you know, see a bit, you know, more increase, because I know ESL Impact has a pretty big prize pools.
It does,
but
yeah.
It'd be nice to see the kind of like a match there from Riot, but I do see like Riot puts a lot more effort from like just the purely dev side of things into getting like women involved, honestly. And that's something that it's just really interesting to see, because I'm from CS, and it's like, it's the moment you play Valorant, it is like, you can tell, it is very evident. Like the advertising in game, it's like when Game Changers was on, like literally when you booted Valorant, and this was kind of traumatizing for me after we lost, because I would boot Valorant and I would just see like the music video that had like me and Mimi and like the animated version of us, and it's just advertised like in the fucking game, like on the main screen it says Game Changers, and the bottom left you can click it, it tells you about Game Changers. Then when you load into game on Bind, or you load it on Ascent, there's posters in game and talking about, yo, come watch Game Changers, and it's like, oh, that's super sick, until you fucking lose, and then you see a reminder of it everywhere and you can't play the game for a couple weeks. But besides that, it's super interesting. I think it's super captivating, and it's always something I haven't experienced. Not to say that there isn't still like harassment and sexism in Valorant. The community is not perfect, but it's at least like, I feel like making real steps towards like progress from the developer side of things.
To instantly react to the community side of things, or like, you know, people being trolls and idiots in the game, and being generally speaking, and specifically actually misogynistic, I feel like, do you think that's something that is just better across the board, across like all communities, or do you think that Valorant in particular is better than CS?
That's a really good question. I can't speak for, honestly, I'm a fucking geek. I only really play Valorant. Only the really games I play is CS and Valorant. I think in CS, I can just say, because at one point I did have to rank up from like gold when Valorant first came out, and I got placed in gold because everyone got placed in gold, and I had to like rank up, like I had to climb the ranks. And I will say, even that small experience I had like 2 years ago, climbing the ranks in Valorant felt way, I don't know, I just felt like there was way less sexism than I'd ever like encountered in CS. Like in CS, I wouldn't even like turn my mic on. I would just type. I would like no comm. But you know how like bad that can be if you're actually trying to get good at a game. Like comms are like everything. That's something you don't realize until you're like at the top 1%, is when you realize that, damn, comms are actually really fucking important. There's like so many layers to comms. But when like, for me, when I was playing CS, I would just not communicate because I didn't want to get like called a slur pretty much. And then in Valorant, I was like, oh, I don't get called a slur like nearly as much. But I would do wonder if that's like something that's across all games or just Valorant, because I'm super biased because I only really play Valorant. I would love to see like a study on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's If I have to make an assumption here, and I'll put myself out on this one, I bet it's better in Valorant, honestly. Like, I think that there's just more acceptance across the board, and even though I do think that, or at least in Valorant, I think there's more acceptance, but in esports, I would like to hope that we're moving ourselves towards a future where people are more accepting,
Yeah.
but I can't really speak off of that because I don't have firsthand experience, because I think when people hear my voice, they're probably just like, just a dude. Like, there's nothing like I can really make fun of this guy for, so I don't usually find myself the victim of those things. One thing I wanted to touch on with the whole Game Changers initiative, the ESL Impact initiative, all of that being under the umbrella term affirmative action. And I myself find that there are many benefits to running affirmative action programs, whether that is for something like esports, or actually the way that I think it's most talked about in North America is like the collegiate acceptance. And so what would your take be on these sort of initiatives and their benefits, their drawbacks, any of it?
I think as it stands, really, it just feels like it's getting the most value possible, as much as it can, from the amount of women that play the game. And so I feel like at the end of the day, it's pretty much just a numbers game, because when you look at how many like women play the game, or just esports in general, up until Valorant, it's been like a really, really low percent, right? And that's why you probably don't see a lot of like GC or women's or no, marginalized gender players not making it to tier 1, just because of how little women, just baseline population, play the game. And if you look at like any pro sport, you're the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. Those are the people that go pro. Those are the people who are the best in the world, right? And then if you take the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of like, I don't know, a couple thousand people, and you're putting it against the 1% of the 1% of like millions of people, it's like, come on, like it's just a numbers game. Like, that person is very unlikely to be the person that can compete at a high level against those same people that come from countries that have millions of people playing the game, to an extent where it's pretty similar like in CSGO, where it's like you look at the North American population that plays CS and you compare it to like even like one EU central server, like one EU West server, and it's like it's completely skewed. It's an asymmetrical game where you have thousands, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands if you want to be really optimistic, but you saw the charts, right, of people in North America playing. And then you look at it where like millions of people are playing from EU, and you just look at how the results turn out. It's like, it's not really a surprise that NA isn't at that same level, that same consistent level across the board as EU West or EU servers or EU teams, is because it's a numbers game. There's only so many people that you can have playing the game that are interested, that can compete at the very high level. So it's the same concept, but in Valorant. And when you pair a game that already has a lot of girls playing the game compared to like CS, for example, they already have that demographic. And then on top of that, you layer it with an affirmative action program like Game Changers, where it's like, hey, like we're going to be putting in like X amount of money. And like, if you play this and you fall in this category of like non-men, then you can come and play and like have earnings. And now orgs are like, oh, we want a chip of that. We want a chip of like, the eyes on it, the sponsors. Like, I want to get a team in this because there's gonna be so many like sponsors that are willing to work with our team to get eyes on this because so many people like watch it or XYZ. Then it's like, at that point, you are pretty much like fostering a perfect like system for these people to succeed. And whatever amount of women you do have playing the game, you reward them with like, hey, this is like a team environment you can play in, and then you can get signed to orgs. You are like creating the best like opportunity and the best chance of having a woman compete at the highest level, which has like not consistently been done in other sports, especially tactical FPS. It does not happen in tac-fps. Like CS, never. There hasn't been a single girl that has played at like the 1%. You've never seen a girl play at a major, like period, right?
Right.
But with Valorant, not only do they have a lot of women playing the game, but they also have a really inclusive system, and they're really, really pushing that shit. So I mean, if I'm not like living proof of like a girl that being able to compete at like a tier 1 level, or even like a tier 2 level, where I've had multiple trials with tier 2 teams, and my team competes and scrims franchises teams, and we like win scrims, we go even in scrims, we have scrim bucks. Like, if that's not living proof of it being a working system, then like I don't know what is.
So you would characterize the whole thing as essentially, it's not an end in itself to just have women playing Game Changers. You want it to be a means to get them to be playing on the highest level, on the biggest stages.
Exactly. I want us to have our 1% of the 1% of the 1% compete at the highest level. I want us to be like, I want to be that person. First of all, I want to be the girl to do
Yes,
that.
yes.
First of all, I want to be the first one to play at like a major tournament, like Masters or Champs. I want to be that person. But like everything kind of coalesces, like the amount of girls that play the game and Game Changer, it all was building up into increasing the percent chance of that ever happening. Like, obviously it's not guaranteed, But like it's the same as like CS, you know what I mean? Like I'm gonna call this strat because I have like a 60% chance of winning the round with this, or like I'm gonna do this because I have a higher chance of winning the round because of XYZ. It's really the same thing, but for fucking like real life.
So speaking of some of those initiatives that Riot are taking in order to to try to like make this game more acceptable to other people, you spoke about the influencer scene of it, and I think that that's something in particular that CS, like Valve, clearly just like they just don't care. Like
they're working on Dota.
Yeah,
those tables and desks have been at the Dota floor for years now.
yeah, I mean, yeah, like they're just honestly, they just pick what they want to work on and then they're just doing it, right?
Literally.
But for Riot, I do really appreciate that decision that they made to bring in so many other influencers, because have you noticed this? Like I've noticed that certain like girls that kind of like I knew or like was acquaintances with started playing Valorant, and it was almost just like what you, where did this kind of like love for the game come from? Like, because I don't feel like you even knew what CS was. But I almost just want to just give praise to Riot for that. Like it's not like I'm trying to even work with them or anything like that, but yeah, I think that the initiatives that they took in order to put that forward, like they did a really good job, because it kind of strikes me a little bit like Overwatch. Like Overwatch was another game where I noticed a lot of women were playing it, and like CS, I think you did nail it. The mill sim kind of like artwork is just not it's just not appealing for most people. And also the fact that Valve is kind of just like abandoned the marketing side of things for Counter-Strike. Like they just basically are like, this game is good and you better know it. Yeah, you know it's good, and we're not going to put anything else out there.
I do wonder how much of it is also because Valorant feels a lot more like North American. I feel like there's a huge North American fan base for Valorant. That in CS, wasn't it like the NA player base is like a smidgen, like it's like equal to like, it's like less than Poland even,
yes,
or something. I think that might have been that tweet I saw like a year ago by you. Like the NA represent, even just like the population that plays CS is like very, very small compared to Europe.
Yeah, they used to have it on Steam charts. They used to show what servers were getting the most play on just matchmaking in general. And I do think that a Central European server, maybe even Western European server, just alone had more than all of the United States combined in terms of player base. So yeah, it's pretty dire for the North American scene. And actually, you know what? Now that you bring that up, that does actually bring me to the next thing. Like all of my friends have left CS. They're all in, like, so many people are in Valorant. And I guess from your side of things, why do you think that what? I know my side of this, but what do you think appealed to North American people in general for Valorant?
What do you think? Just like pros specifically or casuals? Because I've already speak on the pros. I think Valorant came out at like a really bad time for NACS. Like it was in the gutters. We're talking like 2020. This is back when like teams that like qualified for ESL Pro League got completely cucked out of their spot. And so like, you see that as a pro, you're like, dude, I just watched them play for months, earning this spot that was just like it's just taken from underneath them. Like there's just like, okay, obviously there's like the ESL's a business and blah blah blah, not sustainable. But like you see that, and just at a principle level, you see someone who earns something gets taken away from them after months. Do you even want to really like do anything really there? Like, if you're someone that is like not even a pro, like let's say you're not even pro, let's say you're like the cusp, like you're trying to, you see that, it's like, dude, what's the point? And then Valorant comes out, you're like, oh shit, like square one, like let me hop over, like I'm down, I'm game, right? So just from a pro level, I don't see how like when it came out, that is what was happening in NACS, like that exact thing was happening. It was just like the worst time for CS, and I feel like that's why a lot of like pros migrated over to Valorant. From a casual POV, I'm not really sure. I think it's because like maybe it has something to do with Riot being really popular in League and League being actually kind of popular in NA. I wonder how much of that kind of came over to Valorant, because I don't know the percent of CS players that make up the Valorant population, because I feel like kind of what you were saying earlier about the influencers, like people that you've never even heard of play CS even once before, they're like into Valorant because it's just more of like a palatable game to them. Like I just wonder how much the population is completely new, like no FPS experience, because I don't really know the answer, but I'd be down to know and like find out, honestly.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, and that's kind of what I would have come at this angle with, was that with the ESL Pro League North American side of things dissolving and it just kind of becoming a singular entity, mostly in Europe, and even North American teams having to travel to Europe if they're still a part of it, that really took away something to strive for. And even when I talked to people like Daps, because he played a little bit at the like the premier level essentially right before he got the coaching gig for Liquid. He was talking about where there's just nothing you're really striving for. Like you can grind through premier right now, you can win it, but then you actually are in kind of a qualifier to get into Pro League, and there's only one slot available, and so the chance that you're going to be that team is so unlikely. It's so low, given that you're already hindered by the fact that you're the one that has to travel to Europe. You're going to be jet lagged when you play into this qualifier. Like you need everything to go your way. You need the stars to basically align if you want to actually capture a Pro League slot, which you probably will actually just end up going 0-5 in the group stage with. Like, there's so many things against you in that one. I'm not talking trash about teams in particular, but that's just the fact of the matter.
And then unless you're like on a partnered team, right, with ESL Pro League, then you keep your spot, right? This sounds actually really similar. Like I actually haven't heard it said out loud, but this sounds really similar to the current system for Valorant. Like the new system for this year, like they have the partner teams, and then you literally spend the whole year in an Ascension, and then one person from Ascension goes up into the partner league. It actually sounds really similar. What the fuck?
Yeah, well, actually,
they're not really that much different.
Now that you mention that does bring me to another issue that kind of I don't know if you want to call it an issue or just the fact of the matter is that Riot has leaned into franchising. I think a lot of us saw that this was coming for a long time. People didn't know when it was going to happen, but obviously it's here now. And a couple of the orgs that I think most people knew what the orgs were going to be, but then there were a couple that were more fringe cases, like TSM not getting a nod. Like that was one where I think people were a little bit surprised. But what is your take now on certain orgs getting into franchising, certain teams going to be in the Ascension sort of league? Just how does that play out for you?
I think it's interesting. I think there were orgs that made it through that I weren't expecting. Like I was expecting your stock standard, like LCS looking ass, like TSM, C9. See now my what's it called? My ignorance of LCS is really showing now because those are the only two teams I can think of. Yeah. The TSM, C9, Sentinels was definitely getting in after they did with Shroud. Like they were gonna get in, dude. They bring in too much viewers for them not to get in for any other reason. And then I was thinking Guard and like maybe another one because Guard's like bankrolled by billionaires, right? So that's what I was thinking. So I was actually really surprised when I saw that TSM just straight up didn't make it. Although that was kind of like rumored in the scene because of everything that happened with like their CEO and apparently like their relationship was already a little bit fractured going into the partnership process. But I heard a rumor, and I didn't hear about this when I was on Cloud9. Just to clarify, don't come for me, Cloud9, please. I'm off the team now at this recording of this podcast. But I was reading on Reddit like rumors that apparently C9 was like not even in like they were going to make it until G2 got outed because the whole Andrew Tate situation. And that's just a rumor that I read, and I was shocked to even hear that because Cloud9 in my head was already like a straight shot for franchising or partnership rather. They're trying to avoid the term franchising. It's like partnership, but call it whatever you will. I'm just gonna clarify for the audience, but that's what I thought too. It was really interesting. Energy coming in was also something that shocked me, but not because they're a bad org. I just was putting other orgs above them.
Yeah, so now the road becomes really difficult for people trying to play through the Ascension. You say that it's like just like one team that has really a chance to make it. Do you think that will in turn have a cause and effect reaction where people are maybe going to pay attention less to like because before, for contrast, it was like an open circuit. Like people could kind of play through all the VCT stuff, they could play through all the Challenger stuff, and then they could make their way to the big events. And like teams like the Guard, for example, did that, and people fell in love with them, and yet now they're on the outside looking in. So do you think this is going to like what do you think the future is without putting any words in your mouth? Like what do you think now of the tier 2 scene of Valorant?
It's been rough down here. I'm not gonna lie, just observing how the off season's played out and everything, it's fucking rough. I'm not gonna lie, but I do have, dare I say, I have some hopium. I have some hopium for next year because as a result of there only being 5 teams in a partnership period, you can only imagine there's so many players that deserved it that they just don't get a spot. Team like players that are absolutely like, dude, you're pretty much saying when you have 5 teams, it's like top 5 players in each role. Like you're not even talking about top 10. And I could easily name 10 players that are like insane and that everyone could be like interested in off the top of my head. So you think those players have to find a home somewhere, and that's going to be likely the top of the challengers and Ascension League that they have planned. So I do have some hope for, the players that have garnered a lot of interest, like the Guard, people that have earned everyone's kind of like, viewership and respect to compete in Ascension, because it does seem like a genuine league. They're running 2 splits of it. It's like a majority of the year that they're going to be running challengers alongside the partnership league. So I have some hoping that those players are going to carry the league and carry the viewership. But I think it's really interesting because I think it was recently announced that there's going to be 6 teams from the open qualifiers and 6 teams that are invited. And you can guess which teams are invited because they're the only like 6 orgs left remaining in Ascension. It's like M80, Guard, TSM, couple other ones I can't think of right now, but that are still like orgs that are still invested in G2 that are still invested in the scene. And it'll be really interesting to see like pretty much the rest of us, which is those 6 open slots, because I don't even think there's 6 other orgs that are invested in Ascension right now. So you're going to see a Challengers League that has like 4 free agent teams, 2 teams that got signed because they qualified, and then like 6 teams that are already invited. So it'll be really interesting to see how they play against like the free agent teams that are going to probably come up from the qualifiers. I think it'll be good.
With the Impact League having, for ESL, for like the women's ESL Impact League, and the experience that you now have from playing at such a high level in Valorant, is there any temptation to give that a shot?
I've joked about it, like, dude, why don't we play an ESL Impact and Game Changers? Because you probably win. But no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke. We would not win ESL Impact. It would be fun, but now as it is, for GC players, your season is fucked. We don't actually get an off season. I don't know if this is like news to you, but pretty much for like 8 months of the year is like the co-ed circuit, which is like last year was challengers, open qualifiers, champions, et cetera, and then like the last couple months of the year is like pretty much for game changers. Obviously there's game changers events sparse in between everything and like wherever they can fit it, but at the end of the year is like the game changers world champs, and it's like in November. By that point, by the time we were playing in that event, teams were off for already like 1.5 months, 2 months, some 3 months at that point. Like they had off season completely in full effect. They were just like chilling, vibing, bro, like literally no burnout, nothing. Meanwhile, for me and other GC players that qualify for these events, we are playing literally the entire year with no break. When I came back from Berlin, my team died. I had to find a new team within 2 weeks because guess what? Ascension is fucking 2 weeks from now. So, yeah. And at the time it was 4 weeks from then. And you want to go into Ascension with a team that has at least a month of practice. So the moment I came back, I'm instantly thrown into, now I need to find a new team. Now I need to practice with that team. I don't even get a break the whole year. There wasn't like more than like a 1 or 2 week break. So we don't even get an off season. So GC players kind of get fucked in that regard, to be honest, which is kind of something I wish you could really see differently, but I don't really know how you would accommodate it in the schedule of everything. I mean, I'm not gonna play victim. You're from CS, you know how bad the schedule can be for players, literally playing every week of the year, so I'm not gonna complain. But even if I wanted to, I don't think I could even play ESL Impact. But I will say, I was playing CS the other day, I was fucking with some friends. I low-key feel better at the game now than I ever did, because I feel like I actually understand so much of like tactical FPS fundamentals that I didn't understand when I was fucking like B- on ESEA.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it goes both ways. Like I've seen people actually start in Valorant now, and then they start playing CS after, and they use.
Really?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Oh my god,
there's been a few people.
Crazy.
No one's obviously reaching like the pro level, but people I think in like lower ESEA divisions now started in Valorant, which is really cool. And I think
so cool.
that kind of is like some people forecast this, that they were like saying there's gonna actually be crossover, because some people were terrified of the fact that people were only gonna leave CS to join Valorant, but now we're seeing the cross-pollination, and I think that's really nice in general. I think this just brings me to, what does the future hold for Mel? Because you obviously have departed C9 White, and you're talking about building a new team after that event, and so what is that all looking like right for you?
Without leaking too much, I will say the future is looking good. I'm really, really interested in this one team. I'm actually really excited for you guys all to meet them very soon, I hope. I'm not sure exactly when this podcast will be published. Maybe it'll be announced by then. We'll see. But I have a lot of confidence in this new group of players that I've been playing with. And I'm honestly looking really forward to what we can do next year. Our first tournament is Ascension, which is the co-ed circuit for anyone unaware. It's coming up in 2 weeks. Pretty much 2 weeks from... Oh my god, not less than 2 weeks actually, like 10 days. Like 11, 12 days from now.
Yeah.
So
okay.
That's the first qualifier, and that's going to be the first time we get to actually like prove our merit. Although I'm a little upset in some ways, you know. I'm a little sad that, you know, Cloud9 White, we couldn't play in like this qualifier together with the Bob iteration of the roster. I feel that would have been really, you know, cool to see how that roster would have gone against the open qualifier teams. But it is what it is. I'm really excited for this current roster though, and although I will say I would have been, let's see, how do I word this? I was really looking forward to playing like on a co-ed team around this time. Like last year, if you asked me, I would have been hoping to be like on a co-ed team that probably would be already an Ascension or a partnership. But you know, it is what it is. Sometimes it doesn't go out as you planned it. I'm not sure if you saw my twit longer with the Cloud9 like a secondary team and everything like that. I was really hoping that would go through, but it is what it is. But I feel like I'm really excited. I'm really happy with the roster I'm currently working with, and you guys will see. We're gonna do some damage next year. I'm pretty excited. I feel like for me, kind of what I was telling you about the issue with pressure, not only just as a team, but as an individual, and people are hyping you up to be like the GOAT or the best player and like the best player in IGL, and you see your face on like so much different marketing material, it kind of gets to you. And I think after that loss, it definitely was like a humbling experience, because like I said, you really shouldn't be losing to those teams. But the fact is, the reality is, like, we all lost to those teams. Like, not just me, but as a team, we all lost those teams. And I feel like this next year is going to be like the proving myself again arc. And I'm just going to ditch the ego, honestly, at this point, and just pretend I'm from ground zero and just like prove myself again to everybody, because I don't really know. It seems like the most logical way going forward.
Yeah, well, that's what I love to hear. All right, you've got a chip on your shoulder now. It's not all just given to you. All right.
Exactly.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Mel, for hopping on with me. I think this was really illuminating in terms of bringing something to my audience about the Valorant scene, and especially the game changer scene on top of that. Honestly, just wish you the absolute best moving forward, because I feel like it's really cool, the fact that we both started at basically like Fragadelphia level and we both have found our way in the esports space. So it just was such a pleasure talking to you.
No, likewise. I'll be looking at all your tweets as usual. I'll be following your analyst desk segments as I do. I'll be keeping up with CS as much as I can through you. So don't stop, because you're the only lifeline I have back to the scene.
All right. Thanks so much.